Round two.
Round two.
Hi, I'm Zach. And my research question was, is Western media responsible for the negative perception of Muslims in the United States? The first thing I have to clarify is, what is Islamophobia? Islamophobia is defined as fear and hostility towards Muslims and Islam as a whole. Islamophobia dehumanizes Muslims and classifies them as a list of negative stereotypes and nothing more. Moreover, it also misconstrues Islam, an entire faith, as one that encourages violence, aggression, and terrorism. The spread of Islamophobia has also inherently caused the spread of negative stereotypes in relation to the Muslims. These stereotypes include that they are violent, dangerous, aggressive, savage terrorists that are uncivilized. However, what is arguably the most threatening stereotype to Muslims nowadays is the idea of the other. The concept of the other is the concept that Muslims are somehow fundamentally different than the civilized people of the West. This creates an us vs them situation, which further increases hostility and paranoia towards Muslims, thus restarting the cycle of Islamophobia once again. The spread of the concept of the other can be clearly seen in this graph over here. Since 2001, from 2001 to 2007, the amount of people who said that Islam is very different from their own religion increased from 52% up to 70%. And since 2007, events such as the rise of ISIS have only further reinforced the idea of the other. Levels of Islamophobia have increased, but what has been causing Islamophobia to become more prevalent? The answer is media. This stat from the Pew Research Center shows that almost a third of people interviewed stated that what they had seen or read in the media had the most influence on the view of Muslims. In addition, a 2017 report from the Public Religion Research Institute shows that the majority of Americans have almost no contact with Muslims on a regular basis. From those interviewed, 62% stated that they seldom or never had contact with Muslims. As a result, the majority of Americans rely on media as the primary or even the only source of information on Muslims. The problem with this is that a large majority of Western media is Islamophobic. Media-based Islamophobia comes in many forms. What is perhaps the most common and the most destructive form is through underlying unconscious bias that emphasizes the idea of the other. By focusing on the differences between Muslim and American culture, the paradigm that Muslims are somehow fundamentally different than Americans is further perpetuated, thus escalating the us vs them situation that the concept of the other has already created. The effects and implications of the rise of Islamophobia in media are numerous. Firstly, a study from ResearchGate shows that exposure to negative representations of Muslims in media increases negative attitudes towards Muslims. As I previously talked about, the large amount of Islamophobia in media, in addition to the large amount of exposure to media every American has on a daily basis, causes a large increase in the amount of negative attitudes towards Muslims. Moreover, the increase of negative attitudes towards Muslims has even more adverse effects. A study from SAGE found that the negative portrayal of Muslims in media also increases support for anti-Muslim policies. An example of this policy is President Trump's travel ban, which targets 8 countries, 6 of which are primarily Muslim. The 2 countries on the travel ban, which are not Muslim, are almost completely irrelevant. North Korea sends almost no immigrants to the US every year, and Venezuela's travel ban only affects its officials rather than its citizens. Despite the large amount of outcry support for the ban's abolishment on grounds of bias against a religious group, an ORC international poll shows that there's actually a rather balanced public opinion on travel ban, as you can see here. From 1,002 people interviewed, 47% said they were in favor of the ban, whereas 53% stated that they were against the ban, even when the fact that the travel ban primarily targeted Muslims was emphasized in the question. A large amount of this support is attributed to Islamophobia, which in turn is attributed to Western media. With great power comes great responsibility, and as the previously stated primary source for information on Muslims, Western media has an innate responsibility to provide unbiased, factual, and reputable information regarding Muslims. This responsibility has not been fulfilled for quite some time. Examples of Islamophobia may be seen in both left-wing and right-wing sources. For example, CNN host Glenn Beck once famously said to Congressman Keith Ellison, the first Muslim ever elected to the US Congress, "Sir, prove to me that you are not working with the enemies." This exemplifies the concept of the other. In saying this, Beck implies that all Muslims are inherently enemies until proven otherwise, thus further perpetuating the concept that all Muslims are somehow dangerous and intrinsically different than others. So, if Islamophobia is such a widespread important issue, what can be done about it? Western media must uphold and fulfill its responsibility by providing unbiased factual info. Islamophobia is not a politically gated issue. It is one that transcends personal views and bounds and opinions, and as such, all of Western media, regardless of bias, must take action to reduce Islamophobia. Such actions include providing more positive representations of Muslims in media. A study from SAGE found that exposure to positive representations of Muslims in media produces both anti-Muslim bias as well as support for anti-Muslim policies. As seen in this graph, by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, Muslims who have a strong religious identity also strongly identify with an American identity. This is to say that faithful and pious Muslims are more likely to have strong American identities and be deeply patriotic. The idea of the other is not true. In fact, the opposite is. Muslims are just as American as anyone else, and media should acknowledge this and change the way Muslims are portrayed in media in order to reduce the perpetuation of negative stereotypes. To quote Leela Abulagad, professor of anthropology, "We should not ask how Muslim societies are distinguished from our own, but how intertwined they are, historically and in the present, economically, politically, and culturally." Western media is responsible for the negative perception of Muslims in the US, yes, but it is an issue which can be fixed. Through positive media representation and the reduction of the perpetuation of negative stereotypes, Western media can reduce Islamophobia in American society and fix the damage which it has done. Thank you.
All right, good job, Zach. Your oral defense question. So the first question I want to ask you is, what strategies did you use to gather information and conduct your research?
I used a number of different sources from both academic papers such as EBSCO, Equestria, etc. But one thing which really helped me was to find studies. I would go onto articles which referenced credible and reliable information and find the citations and then cite those as well as the citations of those, and just almost made kind of a web of sources which covered every single topic I wanted to.
Okay, great. And then if you were to take your research a step further, where would you go next with it?
I'd say one thing which I wanted to emphasize more but didn't get a chance to was how perception affects discrimination. So I think if I would take my research a step further, I would probably examine how the effects of unconscious bias and the way you're raised affect views such as Islamophobia. Because I think that a large amount of Islamophobia is just caused by people seeing and perceiving things wrong. So I definitely want to do a lot more research on that.
Okay, great, thank you. All set? How many pages of works cited did you have?
I had 3 pages.